I'll introduce Stacy. Stacy Spruill is one of our more experienced safety advisors here at the BC Forest Safety Council. There's lots of experience dealing with companies, both large and small, and helping them develop their safety systems or the safety programs, as well as their injury management and return to work programs. Stacy's done this presentation a few times. She's in demand to go to different companies to present this information. So without any further ado, I will pass it over to Stacy.
Thanks, Gerard. I was just asked to turn down my mic a little bit. I hope that won't affect the rest of you. Welcome to the webinar presentation on the principles of injury management, specifically designed for small companies. With us today, we have a number of companies spread out throughout the province of British Columbia. We've got Chilliwack Crescent, Lansdale, Cranbrook, 100 Mile House, Williams Lake. So in our group today, we're going to be discussing ways in which we can help you, first of all, identify why the program is necessary, and then two, work through the processes of ensuring that you are successful in an application of it. The presentation that we're going to be following through, as you see on your screen, has been designed specifically for us to walk through the fundamentals. At the beginning of the presentation, I had sent all of you a web link last night to WorkSafe BC presentation that they put together to alert people as to why injury management is so necessary in small business. Unfortunately, I was unable to make it successful in a presentation today online with you. However, the link is available for all of you in your email, and I would encourage you to go to the web link and watch the presentation standing on the edge. It simply demonstrates the opportunities for hazards to result in injury to workers, and it shows repeatedly over and over again how simply this can occur. And certainly, as we walk through this presentation, I don't need to remind any one of you in our industry the numbers of industry workers who are injured annually, and certainly those that those injuries result in a fatality. As demonstrated over and over again, historical injury rates in forestry have shown a decline, and we have to be very proud of all of the work that each and every one of you and your workers has done to accomplish this. In our industry, as we compare ourselves to British Columbian workers overall, our injury rates have a tendency to extend to twice the length of time in recovery as any other industry. So what that relates to in terms of days is if in another industry a worker was off for 45 days, in forestry that same injury would result in a 90-day absence. At the present time, we understand that we're having difficulty in finding and retaining workers. So when we have a good worker of long-term service with great skill sets, we need to try and hold on to them as long as we can. And we certainly need to not only protect them from injury, but when they are injured, we need to be able to develop a process by which we can integrate them back into the workplace as soon as possible. Our average age of workers in our forest industry now is creeping up above 50, and in some places getting closer and closer to the 60s. And preventing injuries at this age is absolutely key to maintaining a strong workforce. If we look at this particular slide, you can see that the injury rate and serious injury rate for forest-related CUs has demonstrated a slight upturn as of 2010. And we need to address that. A lot of you may make the presumption that the upswing is in regard to the fact that we ramped up and we have an industry that's stronger now than it was in 2008, 2009. But I think that you'll find that as part of the upswing, we've also had workers returning at a far greater rate over 2011 to 12 and 13. And the industry injury rates have also increased, as you can see here. However, it's probably not so much related to the fact that more workers are actually working, but more likely the fact that they've come back to work and are working long hours at an older age group. As we walk through this particular slide now, you'll see that all of the other industries, the black line, has sort of leveled out and seems to be better managing themselves as opposed to ours, which is shown since 2009, again, an upswing or increase. The forestry injury rate dropped 22% over the last 5 years, inclusive of that slight increase in 2010. The overall British Columbia injury rate dropped approximately 27% during that same period of time. Of these three graphs, they're all indicating basically the same thing, that we as an industry have driven down our injury rates for several years consecutively. However, they're now all demonstrating in forestry a moderate increase to our injury rate. Now, for those of you that received the documentation I sent in your email yesterday, we are going to be looking at the definitions and terms that I sent you, or glossary of terms that I sent you. And there will be terms that may become unfamiliar to you. I want you to feel free to contact Gerard immediately if I'm using a terminology that does not allow for you to fully understand the processes that we're discussing. One of the things that you will find us looking at is a reference to your classification units, which is basically the assessment department at Work Safety's description of your work activities. Now, currently today, Sandra, for instance, is working with classification unit number of 703008. So she's integrated forest management, which you'll find on the fourth line down on the screen in front of you. Both Ben and Matt are coming to us with the new classification unit number 763036, which is now called Field Work Services. So we actually have three, because Mark Schneider, as Mark has finally joined us, Mark is also included in that classification unit number. So as we walk through a definition and explanation, you'll hear me making reference to the rate group DR, and you'll see that on the screen in front of us here, sea spray logging, for instance, so around the enterprise is there, the 763022, which is log scaling. And they are not within this rate group DR. However, the dry land sort is. If there's any confusion about this, I'd be happy to walk into it further with you. But if we can move forward now, it'll give you a better understanding that we are talking about forestry. We are referring to references to the rate group DR, which is similar activities associated with forestry. So our objectives here today, let's have a look at those more closely now. We're going to recognize the benefits of the program and obviously break it down into elements so we can understand the functioning of the program and how it works within your organization. We're going to assist you in building a very specialized or individualized program because your positions in industry are going to be as unique as you are people. And coming up with a successful program that would be best integrated into your work activities with your workers in your workplaces will require some individualization. We're going to look at the barriers and to developing an injury management program and implementing it successfully, and how to access the free tools and resources. Now, in the package that I sent you last evening electronically, you would have found a number of those resources available to you, but we will go through those online as well. But at the end of the course, if anybody, as I said earlier, had difficulty opening or accessing that information, I'm certainly going to make it available to you in some other delivery format. So why is an injury management return to work program important? Well, its primary goal has always been to promote a full and safe recovery of your injured worker back to the workplace as soon as possible, and to give them the ongoing support to make that transition a success. Injury management is based on the philosophy that injured workers can still be productive workers, and it's also been proven that it's a part of a healthy and safe return to work, both physiologically and emotionally. Benefits of the Stay at Work or Return to Work program are simply, it facilitates worker recovery. This is an important feature of the program, because most of you are probably unfamiliar with the fact that the recovery process is actually enhanced by engaging that worker back into a familiar work setting as quickly as possible. It improves the worker's self-esteem and self-worth. Individuals who identify themselves as a productive team member do not do so well when removed from that scenario. So allowing somebody to languish on sofa at home, perhaps uninvolved and disconnected to the workplace, is a detriment to their recovery. It improves worker morale by allowing that individual to return to work even in a graduated or modified work program. It allows for everybody to feel a part of the team once again, but more importantly, it doesn't leave any part of that team working harder than in the absence of the injured worker, but certainly it allows for the injured worker to feel more integrated back into the process, even though that they're unable to perform perhaps their normal duties in the beginning. It decreases the workplace disruption, and obviously that's because you're able to fill that work position, even if it's only on a part-time basis or on a modified basis. The functioning of the team continues. Productivity may drop slightly, but the morale of having everybody back in the workplace together, working together, is a benefit to the company overall. Decreases the claim duration, and certainly this is the financial end of an injury management return to work and how it benefits all small companies. In all cases, as we walk through the process today, you're going to understand the financial reasoning behind this, but in decreasing a claim duration, you're saving the company from long-term debt, in which must be paid back to Work Safety Fee. You do pay a premium for coverage that will allow for an injured worker to receive compensation while they recover, but the cost to the company is exorbitant. And so the quicker we can get the worker back into a routine of working, even if it's on a part-time basis in the beginning, it lessens the amount of payback will be required of the company over time. Reducing the claim costs, again, the costs as we walk through in slides as we approach the mid-morning, you'll see that the costs are exorbitant, not just in the cost recovery to the injured worker, but the overall cost to the business. And we'll examine those at greater depth in a scenario that I've put together for us to review that information. Contributes to a safer and healthier workplace. I think that people recognize, workers in particular recognize when an employer has gone out of their way to provide a safety net for them. I think it also contributes to that whole culture of safety. When we start talking about how do we make a workplace safer, we have to consider the fact that things happen, and we are prepared to manage those as well as we do the other hazards and risks in our occupational daily activities. Retains valuable workers. Statistics, again, have demonstrated that workers who are given this opportunity to return to work sooner recognize the return to full wage sooner than they would have normally had if they stayed off on benefits. It instills upon them a sense of responsibility back to the employer. And as a result, those individuals that have been well managed during an injury, even though the employer may have been a part of the process where the worker became injured, when they're embraced and handheld throughout the process and returned to work healthy and safely, they have a tendency to remain longer with the employer over time. And reduces the need to recruit or train replacement workers. And if we were talking back again about reducing the claim cost, this is one of those. Because when you've had a highly skilled worker who does remarkable work with a good production record, and you lose him to injury, and then you have to try and train somebody to replace them, and maybe the first 2 or 3 don't work out, you can understand how the cost of that over time would be difficult to bear for a small company. So the benefits, 4 of them, obviously, we talked about financial, physical, mental, and emotional, but there's a sense of ongoing accomplishment when you have a continually earned wage, one that you continually earn with the same team in the sense that accomplishment has been met as a part of that team. The belonging to a team, when a person is removed from that, and often even when they're replaced over short term, there's a disruption to the process. And certainly we're going to try and avoid that. Ongoing contact and socialization with coworkers is a remarkable way to ensure a healthier, quicker return to work for any worker that's been injured. And that sense of identity is so important to many, many workers. As a woman, I know that there's an opportunity for me to identify myself as a variety of things before I actually say I'm a safety advisor with the BC Forest Safety Council. But I think for many of you, you'll recognize that in having conversations with your workers or in watching them communicate with others, they have a tendency to identify themselves with not so much with who they are, but what they do. And removing that identity by taking a log hauler out of the truck and placing him on the sofa at home can interfere with his ability to recover. Absenteeism from work over time has a dramatic effect on all of us. It's clearly demonstrated that they start to doubt their ability. If taken away from what they do and do well, and provided with an injury that doesn't allow for them to accomplish much, they can start to doubt their abilities overall. And in doubting their own skills, the length of time away from continually participating in the skill set to which they have been valued as a worker, by removing them from that process, you can actually interfere with their time which it takes for them to return to work successfully. Questioning the value in the workplace, well, they're no longer in the workplace if you've allowed for them to go home. And there's always a concern, am I going to be replaced? Will they want me back? Am I damaged goods? These kinds of questions will go through the mind of an injured worker who's allowed to stay away from his place of work without having contributed to the ongoing success of his business. They lose their social relationships with their coworkers. A long-time absenteeism, as you can understand, would allow for a breakdown in those social relationships to occur. It may be that they work very closely with one other person, and having now been replaced, that other coworker now has a new worker who he's working very closely with. And again, that can create some insecurity in regard to his ability to return. They lose self-respect that comes from being that person that has always been the breadwinner. In most cases, the benefits provided by Work Safety are adequate. It's not the same as earning a full wage. And certainly not being a productive breadwinner is also very hard on many people. And finally, that component that links them to their identity. Again, if I'm not log hauler anymore, what am I? Who am I? So I designed a scenario where we have actually built a small injury into a driver, a log truck driver, in a rollover accident. And through the scenario, we're going to walk through the actual calculator, the Work Safety calculator, on how a simple incident can result in a catastrophic financial loss to a company. And as we walk through this, you'll understand why I use that term catastrophic. The link that you see at the top of the page in front of you there is actually the link that will take you to the calculator. Now, because of the difficulty for some of us having access to online activity, we're going to walk through a scenario. And it is simply this, but you can actually go to the website and run a scenario of your own using the activities surrounding say Sandra's integrated forest management activities, or in the case of Ben and Mark, it might have something to do with the field service work that you do. You can actually determine what it is that you want to investigate. You may have had a loss in the past if you'd like to re-examine what the total loss to the company was financially over time. In this particular scenario, we have a log truck descending with a full load that's coming off the switchback. When the left front tire blows, the truck crosses the road, hits the soft shoulder, flops over a side of a ditch. The driver receives minor abdominal and head injuries, dislocated left shoulder, but a broken left arm. In showing you the money, This is the front or first page of the actual calculator that you would experience on the WorkSafeBC website if you were to go there yourself. So here we have loaded in that it's Bob Load and Haul as the company name, and the incident described simply as it was. On the second page of the calculator, we start to look at the actual costs associated with the injuries and the time lost. So at first it says time provided for the first aid. We've given roughly 4 hours at $25 an hour. And you can see that these will automatically sum score as they move across. So it's very easy for you to be able to maneuver through this document yourself. Time for transportation to the hospital, we gave an additional 4 hours at $25 an hour. And the lost productivity of the affected workers. So workers, we had 4 hours with 4 employees. And again, the time to make the area safe, we gave an additional $150. The cost of the ambulance at $500. And so the total cost for the first few hours of the incident now is already at $1,550. As we move into the second or third step, second page of the actual calculations, we're now looking at the investigations costs. And many of you probably didn't even incorporate this into your original strategy on how the cost overall of an injury would play out. But this is one of the earliest costs that you'll sustain with an incident. In most cases where an injury has occurred to a worker, an investigation must ensue immediately. So it's actually the second of the costs that we're going to examine here. So investigating the incident, we've given it 20 hours at $25. The time spent to complete an investigation report, we gave roughly 5 hours at $25. Time to complete the related paperwork, and this includes all of the company records, the accident book, payroll records, company report forms, etc. So roughly an additional 5 hours. Time to complete the related WorkSafe BC documentation, obviously the Form 7, and so on, 5 additional hours at 25. And for serious injuries and incidents, the time to report the incident to the Workmen's Compensation Board and meet with their officers, we could put an additional 10 hours. In this particular case, we felt it was relevant. So follow-up meetings to discuss the accident itself, we've got 6 hours at $25 and an additional 2 hours with the employer. Again, we're now looking at a sum total of $14.45 for that page. Bob's Load and Haul, again, now into the damage of the cost and overall. So time to assess damage, we gave roughly 2 hours. Time to repair or replace equipment, an additional 8 hours. Time to coordinate the work repairing. And you see that we bumped up the replacement dollars from $25 to $35 overall. These are the individual costs that you can assess based on your own work activities and your involvement in them. But in each and every one of your industry activities, you'll see that most of these things will be based on your work activities. So certainly with Mark and Ben, this might have been an incident involving a rollover of your plumbing while commuting to and from the work site. So it may actually be damage to your vehicle as opposed to a commercial truck. The same thing may apply differently, for instance, to sea spray, where you've got log scaling as your activity. We may not have damage to costs in terms of equipment in your particular case. However, if that were the case, we would just pass through this screen entirely and move directly on to additional costs. But again, you can see how quickly the summing up of the overall expenses turns very quickly from something that was sitting at roughly $1,500 on the first page. We added almost an additional $1,500 on the second page. We're now looking at around $4,000 here because we do have truck insurance costs on this one, which wouldn't apply to all of you. The replacement costs, this is where it starts to show differently. Replacement costs may be replacement of the worker, replacement of the equipment, but you can see how, again, very quickly we've gone from $70 time to hire and relocate replacement workers, and the relocation, the rescheduling of other workers didn't necessarily apply here, but certainly in Mark and Ben's line of work, it could very well be. We're going to take the same number of resources and reallocate them, and that would require a rescheduling process. And that, again, is worthy of being noted here. Trainer time for the new or relocated workers, again, the cost of compensation to a worker who's new, who's being trained in a new position, would need to be examined and certainly noted here. Training time for new or relocated workers, again, if it meant juggling an entire shift and putting people on new positions in order to ensure that the work and productivity of the company remains consistent with the contract in front of the company at the time. So moving on now to step 6, we're looking at the productivity cost. And you need to consider an incidence and how it relates overall to a company. So here we have lost productivity of time, disruptions. In some cases, you may find an incident will be so disruptive as to threaten the contract that you have. In this particular scenario, we didn't do that, but I know in the past that there have been workforces that have been diminished based on incidents that they lost contracts, and that can be a very costly feature in calculating the overall expenses put out by a company after an incident. Time spent actually managing an injury claim. The longer the worker is away from the workforce, the longer and more expensive the claims time management dollars will be. So certainly bringing them back into the fold, so to speak, sooner than later allows for closer hands-on management as opposed to having to manage from distance, which can be, as you can see here, really timely and expensive. Reducing productivity of the injured worker after the return to work, we need to remember that in bringing them back and integrating them slowly back in, there always will be a cost. And here we were very conservative in the overall cost. We gave the productivity loss in returning the worker back to work at only 8 hours at $25. So we're now at the final and last page of the calculator, and this is where it really starts to home in the overall expenses that a company will put out in the management of a single incident with injury. So we're looking at, in the first 4 rows, the first 4 steps that we looked at, incident costs were at $1,550, investigation costs at almost the same at $1,445. Damage costs, because of the insurance claim on the commercial vehicle, ran at $4,000. Replacement costs, most of you probably didn't even consider these as overall expenses, but look, we were already at $1,250, and the productivity costs at $1,340. So the total outlay to the company now would sit at around $9,585. But this is where it starts to become very interesting. If we move down along the screen, we're going to see the recovery costs. Now, most of you have probably experienced over the last few years where we've had a very abrupt and dramatic slowdown in our industry activity. We've seen it margins of profit sitting at probably between 1% and 3%. So if one was to look at the total cost of the incident to the company at $9,585, below the line where it shows recovery costs at 1% margin, 3%, and 5% margin, you'll see on the very next line what the overall cost to the company's ability to repay the $9,585 equates to. On the 1% margin alone, it means that the company's gross sales must increase that year by $958,500. $958,500 of additional profit to the company to compensate for the loss of that injury at $9,585 at the 1% profit margin. If you look at 3%, if you were looking at a 3% profit margin, it would only cost $319,500 of additional sales to a company to compensate for the loss of that injury at $9,585. So again, very dramatic way to look at it. The number of working days to recover from the accident cost, if you look at the final line, at the 1% margin of profit, it would be 159.8 days. Where if we're looking at the 3% margin, it's still significant, where the company would have to recover from a 3% profit margin ratio, it would still take 53.3 days to recover from a cost initially that was only that of $9,585. So I think this tool, given the fact that we're just going to flip back very quickly here to ensure that all of you have that website link down, because I think it's a valuable tool, and each one of you should take the opportunity over time to go there and run a scenario that's similar to perhaps one that you've experienced firsthand in your company, or a possibility, a mock one. Becoming familiar with this actual form and how it relates to how you can actually assess and determine overall cost to a company, I think is a relevant term. And certainly when you're in a position where you're trying to perhaps convince your employer that this was a process that should be engaged in by the company in the development of not only the management injury, but certainly an early return to work scenario. This is one of the tools that will help to highlight the costs and how the company benefits from that. So we're going to ask you now to refer to the scenario again based on the overall 6 weeks absence. Now, what we did here is we said that our Bob's driver was actually off for a 6-week absence. But as you can see, if I gave him a daily wage on the top line here of a $200 per day wage, and I gave him a 6-week absence, then the cost overall to, in wages only, and we're only talking wages in this scenario, is going to be that of $6,000. But you can see if the individual was off for an 8-week absence or a 10-week absence, how that would increase significantly. Now remember, as I opened up the Injury Management Return to Work webinar, I mentioned the fact that in our industry, the forestry industry, our workers have a tendency to stay off work almost at a rate of twice that of any other industry in British Columbia. So you can see how a 6-week absence could very quickly become that of 10 weeks or more. So as we walk through the 6 weeks absence, you see that I've highlighted it in red because we're going to use that $6,000 as a means of determining the net overall cost to the company. So the annual payroll of Bob's Load and Haul is, we're going to say, roughly $300,000. His classification unit is that of log hauling, so 732044, and their rate of premium is paid out at a rate of $6.67 on every $100 of accessible payroll. So that's how you determine from the $300,000 annual payroll to the actual accessible rate on the classification unit for log hauling. Now, we can assume that because the company had had a fairly good couple of years prior to this incident with the flop over and the injury to the driver, they were sitting at a discount of roughly 20%. And how that relates to each and every one of you would simply be the same. If your company has had no claims against their company activity, based on the insurance premium rate, they're given a discount. If a company has had a number of injury claims against that same activity, on the next line here you can see how the surcharge would increase to $6.67 for a $100 accessible payroll. It could increase it to $7.34. So the longer the company goes without a claim, the less money they pay on the base rate for their work activity. So in this particular case, in our Bob's Load and Haul scenario, the company was given a 20% discount. So they actually had a base rate of $6.67, But because they had no claims, they had a base rate that had been reduced by 20% to $5.34. If the same company had had a number of claims, the surcharge would have increased that base rate from $6.67 to $7.34. So if one was to look at the overall cost to this particular company, we'll move down now to the next year's old assessment rate and the new assessment rate. Now what that equates to is that in the year prior to this particular incident, the overall cost to the company on the $300,000 assessable payroll would have been $16,008, pardon me. But on a new assessment rate, based on the increase that they're going to receive because of their claim costs, it's going to be $22,011, which shows the change of the difference between the $6,000 and $3, which was the actual absence of the wage loss for the 6-week period at $200 a day. Now, I know this is starting to get a little bit complicated, so if there's any questions, please feel free to interrupt them now. I'm going to move on now to the second page of the claim costs over the next 3 years, because this is a very important part of the financials that all companies need to recognize. On the previous page, we had a $6,000 absenteeism based on a $200 a day rate. We're now going to take that over, and we're going to look at how that will be paid back over the next 3 years. And here's where it gets important, because you need to understand that when an injury occurs in, let's say it's this year, 2013, and we could say it happened today, for instance, on the 24th of July, and the injury allowed for a 6-week absence after this period of time, where we accrue that $6,000 wage loss. So if we looked at that, in the rest of the year 2013, there would be no request for you to pay back the money that WorkSafeBC paid out to your worker. The payback starts in the second year, and we're going to look at how that applies. So in the first year, you've got the $6,000 loss. In the second year, your cost assessments will ask you to pay back an additional $4,000, and in the third year, you'll pay back an additional $2,000. So we've got now a 3-year payback that starts the year after the incident has occurred. So in our scenario, we decided that it was going to have the injury occurred on July the 24th, today. So in 2014, we will be asked to pay back the full amount of $6,003. And they will do this simply by increasing your premium rate, as we talked about in the first screen. I'll just flip back there. So you can see how we were at a base rate prior to the incident of $6.67 paid on every 100 assessable dollars of income. They increased our surcharge to $7.34 based on the incident. So that increase will allow for them to receive back on every dollar for every worker in your company. Will pay that increased rate to get the first $6,000 back in the first year after the injury. So we're looking at 2014, they would recover $6,003. In 2015, they will recover an additional $4,000. And in 2016, they recover an additional $2,000. So you can see now at the bottom here, the grand total paid back by the company for the $6,000 paid out to a worker for 6 weeks of absence at $200 a day. They actually recover back almost exactly twice the amount. So in keeping that in mind, on top of everything else that we looked at on the calculator, and all of the cost recovery that's necessary to cover a $9,000 loss, including in some cases, I'm just going to flip back gently here. If a 3% margin could be expected, if times are good right now in industry, we might actually see 3% margins of profit. It would still take the company 53 days or $300,000 and $19,500 to recover from 53.3 days. This scenario shows again the recovery costs of just the wages paid out by WorkSafe BC, being a payback over a 3-year period starting the year after the incident of twice what it was that they paid the worker. Now we can sort of see more clearly why it is so important to recognize all of the costs involved in an incident and how an injury management return to work program where you embrace the injured worker and bring them gently back into the work processes as soon as possible becomes paramount to the success of any company's overall financials. Now, this is one incident. Let's presume that we have more than one in a year. And this is a startling statistic that will actually demonstrate to you that it's quite often not the big things that will cost the company greatly in terms of injury. They're quite often small. And we can see here, as the pie chart demonstrates, that falls from elevation, struck by, and falls from same level from working surface, and falls from same level to trees and plants make up a large percentage of probably what we're looking at. Those of you, like Mark, Matt, and Ben, who are in field work services as an activity, are going to recognize how something as simple as a slip, trip, and fall can bring a worker out of the bush for a period of up to 6 weeks. A sprained ankle, a sprained wrist for a log hauler, you can imagine, unable to shift, unable to throw wrappers, unable to winch. You're going to see that individual not able to produce at the same level or perhaps even engage in the activity to which they normally wouldn't. So in this particular scenario here, we have one worker out for a 6-week period. And in this particular case, our scenario indicated that he had a broken bone and a number of other small injuries, but nothing life-threatening. But if you look at this scenario and how this would apply to the rest of us in our normal work activities, we can see how very quickly a single slip, trip, and fall can turn into another one and then another one, especially when injuries are complicated, both musculoskeletal cross tissue injuries, you know. So if we have a slip, trip, and fall in, say, January, and we have another one again in June, and we use the same process of evaluating the cost, you can see how 2 injuries multiplied over the same type of scenario that we looked at, but let's lessen the overall cost, is still going to cost that company significantly. But what happens if we have one small injury of a 6-week absence and we have it over a 3-year period? One injury each year for 3 years. We take the same scenario here and we multiply that by 3 years with 3 additional 10% surcharges. So we started out with the first injury paying $6.67 on our insurance rate per $100 assessable income. And with the first injury, we jumped to $7.34. Well, what happens when we have a second and a third injury? And all of a sudden, we see that jump up closer to $10. Now we're looking at paying almost a double-digit premium paid on assessable $100 assessable payroll. So for every $100 of assessable payroll, you're looking at paying roughly $10 just to cover insurance premiums. And then we look at the overall cost again here, and we multiply this by 3. We're talking about a payback recovery on the first one of $12,000. And on the second one, we have to add an additional 10% onto that. And the third one, additionally, a 10% increase onto that. We're now looking at something quite exorbitant for the company to have to recover from. Not only that, but if we were to take that and then go back here and look at the overall cost of what 3 injuries over 3 years we're going to relate to in terms to how much more business the company would have to produce to cover the cost of those 3 injuries, we can now understand why it's difficult for anyone to understand how they've managed without an injury management return to work program and still stay afloat. So we're going to start to look at those those forms that I sent you electronically in your email last night. The glossary of terms or definitions is part of that package that I forwarded to you. I don't think at this point we've talked about anything that's confused any one of you, but if you have the opportunity to print that definition sheet off, it might be a comfort to you as we move forward. The other thing we're looking at is the free training and resources from the BC Employers Advisory. I have to tell you that overall education, free education by the Employers Advisory is something that I would recommend to all of you. One, because they have a tendency to deal with a broad range of subjects at no charge. It gives you a fuller understanding of how industry as a whole relates to the courses being taught. But because they offer specifically claims management in a 2-week section course, in the morning you deal specifically with the management of the files, and then in the afternoon the actual injury management return to work portion of that course. I would agree that at this point it is accepted by WorkSafeBC as a training institution based on their requirements for injury management return to work. Having mentioned that, I should also perhaps quantify that the BC Forest Safety Council's injury management return to work element is still a voluntary element associated with the Safe Companies program. And what that means is that each and every company can decide whether or not they wish to submit that. And certainly in having attempted it, if they were unsuccessful, we would be happy to walk them through turning that into a positive by making it a more successful submission. But there was a time when WorkSafeBC rewarded all companies who were successful in an injury management return to work program with an incentive of 5% additional back to help offset the cost of having instigated a successful injury management return to work program. As of January 1st, that option was removed, and WorkSafeBC is now undergoing a review of the requirements for an injury management return to work program as they see it from the perspective of the core program. So we'll keep you informed as that moves forward, but at this time, again, the injury management return to work element in the small companies, Safe Companies program is entirely voluntary, and at this time, as I said, there is no additional incentive. However, it is undergoing review, and we will keep you informed as those things change. The other document that I forwarded to you in regard to better understanding mental disorder claims is the Bill 14. And I think it's relevant to bring this up at this time because in the past we've always talked about injuries as something that was physical. We've even done so with our own scenario today where we talked about a flop over and a dislocation and a broken arm. But it's important for all of you to recognize the changes that occurred in the mental disorder claims. And this is done only as of June of 2012, where they've now allowed for compensation for mental disorders. So an individual who's placed in a position of unusual duress or stress at work, who has a reaction, a physical reaction, or breakdown to some extent based on a traumatic event from work or an ongoing low-level stress that they're unable to manage with. These are now claims that can be processed the same way an injury claim would have been processed in the past. So that document is very important. As I said, Bill 14, and the attached handout that I provided for you was printed in June of 2012. And I think it's worthy of you all taking an opportunity to go through that because it's very important for you to recognize that the claim based on mental duress or disorder now will be managed exactly the same as an injury claim that would have occurred in something like our scenario. Now, the other document that's relevant to the success of any process, confidentiality, and certainly that will apply to something like this. When we're dealing about the personal matters associated especially with claims, mental health or physical injury claims. The information that's provided by the worker to the employer and from the doctor to the worker, there has to be an understanding of the protection requirements. Confidentiality is a part of that process. If you are unable to feel confident that the information you provided your doctor was not to be shared with anyone else, there's very little opportunity for you to probably be as open and honest about your injury and how it occurred. The same thing applies with the information that the worker has provided their employer. Again, it's information that must be kept confidential. If a process is going to work, there has to be a level of trust, and this is one of those processes where trust is imperative. If there's an inability to develop that level of trust, there's very little chance of success in the program being implemented on the ground. Now, the Personal Information Protections Act, or PIPA, as I put it up on the screen here too, is one of those documents that I've provided for you because it's imperative for those of you that are not familiar with your rights and responsibilities with personal information. You need time to go through this document and make sure that your processes are in place to ensure that information is not being shared that it shouldn't be, and information that should be shared is shared. So that's an additional document that I'd like you to take the time to review. Now, the reporting requirements for injury and occupational disease, I think as well, I should perhaps make a note here about the term occupational disease. For those of you that are familiar with our overall injury rates and certainly the fatality rates, which are more commonly communicated, especially on the day of mourning, you may have noticed that there's always a number of injuries or deaths reported annually, and then they tend to quantify those that existed, the deaths in particular, fatalities and injury rates. They have a tendency to distinguish the difference between those people that died at work and those people that died as a result of exposure to something that brought about their death from their work environment. So in this last year, we were looking at roughly, I believe, 149 deaths. However, roughly 80 of those were occupational disease. So in dealing with the injury management return to work program, we have to look at a variety of different things now, don't we? We're looking at actual physical injuries that occur on the job. We're looking at exposure to things like pesticides. In the past, we know that asbestos exposure has been one of the greatest leading causes of death to workers that were not associated with incidents at work. And certainly now we have to consider mental disorder and how that relates. So in this particular document that I forwarded to you, we're looking at the identifying roles. We're also going to look at the forms required for reporting and the very specific and significant timelines that are given to companies. It's very difficult for you to have an ongoing relationship with an injured worker receiving benefits if these forms are not met within the timeline that WorkSafeBC requires them to be submitted. So that's a significant part of the process that we need to examine further if we're going to make the injury management return to work program for your company a success. And again, the document is specifically laying out the roles and responsibilities of all workers or players in the injury management return to work program at your company. Now, the basic reporting steps. In this particular case, we're going to walk you through the very first day into the first week. Day one, you must provide the first aid necessary, certainly to an injured worker. You must deal with the emergency services, transport the worker to the nearest medical facility. The reporting of the incident immediately, serious fatalities, serious injuries, major damage to buildings, and release of hazardous materials, and so on. In the days 1 through 3, report incidents to WorkSafeBC. Obviously, it's up to 72 hours or 3 days if it's not serious. If you find out about an injury that occurred more than 3 days after it occurred, you need to report it immediately and explain, most importantly explain that you had not been informed prior to that, and that usually allows for you a moment of grace with them. Initiating the work safety C claim, the employer is responsible for paying the wages on the day of the injury. So the claim actually starts to go into effect the day after. Even though you've notified them immediately, you would be expected to pay their wages for that day and then the following day. And in the first week, you must make sure that all remaining forms are submitted to Work Safety C, including the Form 6, which is the worker's report of injury or occupation. Now, the forms for your injury management return to work program, I provided for you in the second email that I sent you last evening, the injury management roadmap document. And in that, I've accumulated a variety of different resource forms and materials. I took some from the BC Forest Safety Council. I went to Work Safety C because that actually is the lead hand in terms of directing as to what is necessary in terms of reporting forms, but certainly they have great opportunities as a resource for you to extract information and building a process and program yourself. The BC Construction Alliance also has done a great job. The actual roadmap, which is the cover of the document, Injury Management Roadmap, was designed specifically by the BC Construction Alliance in conjunction with Work Safety, and they've done a wonderful job in giving you a pictorial overview of how the management of your injury management return to work program would be, and the BC Employers Advisory. So those are the groups that I have actually accumulated the documentation in forms for. So the components of that injury management program are simply that you must have a company policy or a commitment to your workforce that lays out the roles and responsibilities and the processes by which the company will better manage an injury to a worker. The rules and responsibilities in the document that I provided for you, we will go over that step by step, but certainly it needs to be broken down so it's clear to everyone who they go to, what their expectations are, what the employer's expectations are, and so on. The job task analysis or physical demands analysis is necessary because we need to be able to determine what the job that the worker did required in terms of perhaps his ability to lift or sit for long periods of time, the level of vibrational activity associated with the activity in that. The physical demands analysis also breaks down what the individual who now injured would be required to do at a moderate level. So the job task analysis breaks down what exactly the job requires, and the physical demands analysis breaks down what the ability of the worker has to retain in order to be able to do that home activity. Written procedures, very important. Every policy, the program needs to be very structured. It needs to be laid out and so that there's no vague areas or areas of ambiguity that would allow for people to misunderstand or misinterpret the information. Education, certainly for the individual who's managing the files, there needs to be a level of understanding as to how that is best accomplished, both for the success of the program, but also managing the financial costs of the company. So we're going to look at the day-by-day injury management process again now, but we're going to break it down in a more detailed manner than we did originally. So again, we're looking at providing great first aid to the worker and accompanying them to the hospital or doctor, the reporting of the incident immediately if seriously, and of course we have the 3-day timeline after the fact if not. Obtain the job demands analysis for the position that the worker holds, and prepare an injury management letter for the worker, providing the worker with the entire injury management package, including the forms that they take to the doctor. Now, this is a very, very important part of the process. You have to imagine a doctor receiving one of his patients who has now been injured at work, and the opportunity at this point for the company to make a great step forward in building that relationship and ensuring the success of an injury management return to work program starts with the initial visit to the doctor. If the company is able to demonstrate to that doctor, the same company that the worker just got hurt working for, If that company is able to demonstrate a commitment to help that worker return to work safely and productively in a shorter period of time, the doctor is more likely to consider the option. After all, it is their patient that's come to them wounded, injured, or suffering in some manner. And the opportunity for them to make the correlation between the employer and the injured worker who is their patient, at that time there's a judgment being made. If the doctor is able to receive packages from the company showing sincere commitment to want to work with that injured worker and bringing them back into the workplace sooner, the doctor may actually engage that opportunity right from the very beginning. So it is at that moment that the worker first appears at the doctor, their doctor's office, where the doctor can make a commitment to either work with the company and shorten the time that that worker spends away from work by encouraging them to participate in the return to work program. That's the time in which it must occur. It's very unlikely that after the fact the doctor would reconsider it. There's also the opportunity of timelines between visits to a doctor. So the initial form should be with the worker at the time that he sees his doctor for the very first time. And that's a key part of the success of this program. The opportunity for the worker to return for follow-up visits and have the worker then presented at the second or third visit, you've already lost a critical part of the recovery process in the worker's return. And there's there's less opportunity at that point for the doctor to reconsider and enter into the program after the fact. So again, preparing the injury management letter for the worker, providing the worker with the right package, including the forms for their doctor, to be able to determine whether the doctor will engage in a process of working with the company and returning this worker back to his work activities sooner than later. And having that conversation with the worker, ensuring that the worker is competent to be able to make that presentation. And if not, the injury management return to work or files manager should actually step in and assist in that way. It's easy for us who are taking courses like this and working with the actual development and implementation of an injury management process at work to describe it to one another. It may be very different for a worker who you spent time orienting to the process to do the same thing, especially if they're uncomfortable in the recovery process. So there may be an opportunity where the worker may ask for assistance from the company, and I think it's fair that the company needs to be able to meet that worker's request. Obtaining a complete functional analysis of the worker's doctor, and that's the occupational fitness assessment form. So part of the package that you should be preparing for your worker to take to the doctor will include the doctor's ability to assess the worker's abilities. And then that would, again, assist us as the company in determining what were the best choices of modified or light and restricted duties that would be available. If at all possible, at the time that the worker actually goes to the first time to see his doctor, if you could have had a modified list of duties the same day prepared, it would benefit the ongoing success of this process. But if not, it would be something that you would happily provide to the doctor after the fact, immediately upon receiving their fitness assessment of the injured worker. A complete work safety form, making sure that they're all in and on time and completed to the best of your ability. And if this is an illness requiring home time to recover, to contact the worker and let them know that you're interested in their health and welfare on an ongoing and regular basis. So the individual had a very minor injury, let's say it was a slight a burn or something along that line, and instead of going directly to their doctor, they were treated by the first aid attendant at your workplace and then were sent home for an afternoon to recover. It's still relevant to the injury management process that you be consistent in the way that you manage each and every injury, regardless of how small or how large. So once you've set the process in place as to how the program will work, and you've ensured that your workers are confident that they have an understanding of that, it's very important that consistency be shown, that all workers are treated exactly the same, regardless of whether or not they're the owner's son or whether or not they're somebody that you perhaps like less than another worker. in order for these processes to be successful, you must be able to demonstrate that there is no preferential treatment, that each and every worker will be treated identically. So in this particular case, even though the worker did not go to the doctor but was treated at work and then sent home for an afternoon to recover, it's still important that the worker be contacted at home by the company, and the company needs to express their willingness to want to work with them. And that, again, needs to be documented. In day 2 and 3, you should have contact, again, with the worker. This is a worker now who has been taken to see his doctor or has gone to the hospital. So we're looking at high-level management interaction now. So it's not just the interaction of the first aid attendants and those people associated with putting the packaging together to ensure the worker had what he needed when he went to the doctor, but there needs to be a contact from the highest level, indicating a commitment to the program with the worker. Co-workers of the injured worker are also encouraged to remain in contact with the worker as appropriate. Meeting with the supervisor to begin the discussions of possible work opportunities available should take place in the very first few days, making sure that all non-serious injuries have been reported, and that's within the 3-day business timeline. Initiating the Form 7 must be done immediately, and the start of the investigation. It must occur sooner than later. In order for you to be able to be successful in any incident investigation, time is of the essence, and certainly the sooner you come to the determination as to how this could be prevented in the future, the better. And that would be for everybody in the company and industry as a whole if you share those results with us. So we're now looking at days 14 up to days 14. The supervisors still need to meet with that injured worker and develop the return to work strategies and processes. And certainly, it may require discussions on a day-to-day basis as to what the ability of the worker is and how it's increasing gradually, and how that may relate to maybe longer periods of time working or perhaps slightly more task-oriented activities. Having the workers and supervisors continually sign off on the return to work plan. Remind the workers of their value, and this is a very important part of the healing process. You've brought them back in early. You must continue to encourage them, because for those of you that have ever had an injury, you can understand that there are stumbling blocks associated with your ability and the frustration associated with that. So for the company to continually ensure the worker that their choices were right, and that they'll continue to work to ensure that the worker is not overextending himself, is still working within his abilities, but is still being allowed to remain engaged with his workforce and his team members, is relevant to ongoing success. Again, the continuation of form submissions and making special attention to, now, on the Form 7A, there is a specific item that you must make sure that you, for those of you that are familiar with the form, on the Form 7, it actually indicates whether or not you're going to provide light or modified duties. So when we keep talking about the completion of the Form 7 and making sure that it's in, if you're going to engage in an injury management return to work program, that is the initial contact that you have with Work Safety, showing a willingness to want to use modified light and an early return to work as a means of managing this injury. And it's right on Form 7. Moving forward from day 15 on, you're going to continue to communicate with the worker, the doctor, with their worker through the worker and their doctor and the supervisors. You're going to continue to look at ways that you can modify the duties and increase the tasks associated with those duties to help integrate them back into their normal activity safely, gradually, but as soon as possible. Ensure that no reoccurrence of this incident can occur based on a sound investigation with good recommendations to ensure it's prevented in the future, and involve the worker who is injured as well as many others in the implementation of that. Now, barriers, and there are a number of them, certainly associated with an injury management return to work program. Quite often, I think the things that come to mind right off the bat are quite often employees are put back to work in jobs with the potential to harm them. So we need to ensure that there's good communication between what it is that their functioning abilities are and what the assessment abilities of the job that you're providing them are. And there needs to be a continual review of that. And one of the greatest barriers is if you fail to do this once, there will be a reluctance of other workers to fall into suit and attempt an injury management return to work process in the future. So your ongoing success will be relevant to how well you're able to manage the functioning ability of the worker and suiting them up with an activity that doesn't prevent additional harm to them in the recovery process. The other barrier, I think, too, is quite often we feel that we can bring a worker back to work and provide him with anything. And there needs to be value and meaningfulness to the opportunities for return to work offered a worker. So just because there are a honey-do list of things at the workplace that are continually overlooked and no one ever gets around to doing, you need to be able to suit the skill set of the injured worker and be able to ensure that he's getting some meaningfulness out of the work. So the old adage about, scrubbing the floors with a toothbrush and that sort of thing comes to mind. We see that in the movies all the time. It's almost a form of punishment. And we must be very conscientious not to allow the worker to believe that the company has asked him to do something that is demeaning or below them. So there needs to be an ongoing communication as well. And employees that remain in light-duty jobs long after the therapeutic value is exhausted can create hostility and animosity. So you need to, as I said, constantly review the activities that the worker's doing, allow them to remain challenged without providing them with an opportunity to harm themselves more. The recording of the possible solutions that you come up with as we walk through the implementation of these is very relevant, not just to the ongoing success of your injury management return to work process, but of our industries as well. So interestingly enough, today we have three participants, Mark, Matthew, and Ben, all of which have got fieldwork services as an industry activity, and I'm very interested in how they see themselves as a company being able to produce a list of light or modified duties to an injured worker that perhaps would have sustained a slip, trip, and fall type of an injury. So we're talking about slips, trips, and falls will more than likely be sprains, strains, or breaks. So we're looking at a 6-week absence from the function of may have been something in slash. Now they're unable to do that, but they still want to retain that person's skill set and knowledge. And I'd be very interested in hearing back from you how you would see your company providing a worker like that who could no longer actually go out and commit to field work in field, how you would see your company being able to provide them with access to lighter modified duties. More importantly, with somebody like Saunders Ready-Mix, Laura, great opportunity, really willing to want to share with you what it is that you see yourself being able to provide, because as you know, part of your activity certified through state companies is log hauling. And again, there is a challenge, obviously a challenge there in providing meaningful work to an injured worker who is no longer able to drive a truck. So collectively as a group, we need to try to embrace the scenario and then share willingly with other members of industry with similar activities the results that you've had in the decisions that you've made as to what light and modified duty would look like for your company. And then I want to be able to present that to industry as a whole so that companies that struggle with it can look to you as leaders in developing an injury management return to work program for your companies as to the kinds of things that you have come up with individually based on your activities as ways of embracing and slowly returning an injured worker back into normal work activities. So part of what we're going to do today is talk about the development of and work through the successes and implementation, but I'm going to follow up with each and every one of you as you move forward in the development of your program and find out what it was that you came up with in terms of being able to provide a doctor with opportunities for early return to work for an injured worker based on your unique activities. So,
I'll just interrupt for just 1 second. What I did was I just sent out a note on the chat window there. If anybody has any good ideas that they have discovered for modified work that is applicable to their own operations, by all means, just send me a note back, and we can start gathering the information that way.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'll just keep track of that, Stacey. But yeah, go ahead.
Now, there is another opportunity that we haven't explored to date. We've always, up to this point, we have been talking about you as an employer or your company developing an injury management return to work program, and somebody within your company being that individual or HR person who's actually going to manage the claims within the company. There are outside providers who can actually provide this service to you. So in a small company where you don't have an individual who has the expertise or skill set to do this, there are companies out there where you can hire, and on a monthly basis they will manage at a fee any injuries and the filing and the management of the return to work of those injured workers for you. And the important thing for here to remember is that they're available for you to do. There still needs to be some level of training that occurs with somebody within the company so that they are a coordinated effort between the company representative and the outside provider. That there's an ongoing dialogue between those two, and there's never one without the information that the other requires in order to make a success of this program. The company still would require to manage all other aspects of the program. The communications obviously is still going to be coming from within the company, but the actual file management can be done out of house. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our presentation today. I hope that it has been of meaningfulness to each and every one of you, but certainly I'm very excited to hear back from any of you in regard to any questions or concerns that you may have at this time.